So today's topic. Welcome everyone. Glad to see you all here on our virtual meetup. I see some familiar names out there. Some people I know personally. Good to see you here. Shout out to Tom Smallwood, who was part of the original group, small group of people along with me who helped organize the original Mile High Agile conference way back in 2011. So I was really excited to see that name pop up on the screen here. Many thanks to Catherine and Sherry for organizing this. It takes some time and some work to do all this and organize these, and nobody's paying them to do this. So this is purely volunteer effort to put this all together. So kudos to Catherine and Sherry for helping organize this, along with the other leaders of the special interest group. So a lot of good folks doing a lot of good stuff in Agile Denver. So, all right, welcome to everyone. We're gonna go into breakout rooms here, smaller groups, so you'll get a chance to meet a few folks, introduce yourself, and get initial thoughts, some initial thoughts around the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is culture. So I'm about to share a link here in the Zoom chat window. Let me just type in here. I'm going to use a tool called Mural, and this will allow us to do a little bit of collaboration and interactivity. So I'll ask everyone to click on that link that I just shared in the chat window. And if this works like it did when we tested it earlier, it should be super easy, one click and you're in. And yes, I'm seeing some people join, so it looks like we're good to go. If you haven't used Mural before, pretty intuitive. Let me actually share my screen as people are joining, because I want to just point out what I'm going to have you all do here. And once we get into these breakout rooms and smaller groups, I'm going to have you all introduce yourselves, get to know each other, but we're going to look at 4 different types of organization culture, and they're described here within Mural. What I'm going to ask you to do in your smaller groups is look at these very brief descriptions in the 4 quadrants and be thinking about your own organization. And if you work for a large organization, you might narrow that down to your department or your division of the company. So something that's relevant kind of to your day-to-day work. And see if any one of these 4 sort of stands out to you as, yeah, I think this is a good descriptor for my organization's culture. By the way, at the top of this little section of the screen here, I have the instructions. So if you're having a hard time following along or you forget what I've just said here, instructions right there at the top. So this will be a chance for you to meet a few folks in a smaller group, think about which of these 4 cultures perhaps maybe best describes or you think is the strongest descriptor of your organization's culture. And I'll invite you to write a note. Somebody just did one there. It's really easy. If you just double click anywhere on the screen, it creates a little sticky note, and then you can start typing on it. So you can put your name on that there. All right, so let's do these breakout groups here. I see we've got 33 people on. Why don't we
about 7?
7, yeah. Let's do 7 breakout rooms. That means you'll have about 5-ish in each breakout room, and let's do those for 5 minutes. So in the 5 minutes, get to know who you're with in your group, and talk a little bit with each other about what do you think just best describes your organization here. There's 4 different descriptors. Maybe share a brief story about why that describes your organization. All
and
right.
Brad, how long do you think that we should spend?
Let's do 5 minutes. And then when you do the breakout options, there should be an option for like a countdown timer at the end. So everyone will get a warning when that time's up before it brings us all back together again into our shared room here.
Okay, so it's giving me a list of all of the rooms. If we just go for open all rooms, does that give us the timer setting?
Yeah, there's an options. There should be a little options thing at the
There we
bottom.
go. Okay. So close automatically after 5 minutes.
5 minutes,
Perfect.
and there should be another little option for like a countdown or something like that.
Perfect.
Should be set to
Okay.
10 seconds or 30 seconds.
Here we go. So is anyone left in the room that wants to go to a room? Hi, Carla.
Hi. I'm joining late, so I don't know what the options are. I'm sorry.
They're random, which is great, but let's see if there we go. So I will randomly assign you to a breakout room. And
Okay.
I think you'll have to have somebody send you the link to the mural board that we're using, but everyone's had it. So ask someone to send you the link to the mural board, and the instructions are in the board as well. Okay.
Okay.
So Anna and Shauna, are you still here?
Yes. So
Would you,
yeah,
would you like for me to send you to a breakout room randomly?
sure, that'd be great.
Okay.
Sure.
Hi, Whitney. Have you just joined us or did you return? Sorry, Veronica, I was muted. Can I send you to a breakout room? Because that's where everyone is right now.
What are they doing in the breakout room?
I think they're introducing themselves, and there's a mural. Oh, time is up. Okay.
That's what I was going to say. That's cool. I'll catch the next one. I had a hard time getting to a Zoom link.
Okay.
All right.
Everyone's been given 30 seconds, and then they'll come back. Okay, when you come back to the main room, it automatically mutes you. So feel free to unmute if you want to say hi as we wait for Brad.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Santiago.
Hey, Brad.
Look at your face.
Good to see you.
Santiago's my running and biking buddy. So
well, anybody is welcome too.
Along with Gunnar. Gunner's another biking buddy of mine. Got two bikers. We're going to get the two of you together sometime.
Absolutely, we should.
I'm pointing to you, but probably not in the same place. All right. Well, yeah. Welcome everyone. I hope that was a good way to get to meet a few folks and start to think about this idea of culture. I want to dive right in and explain more about what you kind of got a preview of there in the breakout rooms. One thing I just noticed looking at the sticky notes there, looks like as an overall group, we're kind of leaning a little bit towards the collaborate quadrant in the culture model here. Now, since this is an Agile meetup and a lot of strong Agilists in the group, maybe that's not so surprising that there's a bit of that collaborative culture represented here in the group, but let's dig deeper. So I'm going to share my screen now and go through and explain this model that we're looking at, and of course talk about, well, how do we deal with culture? How do we shape the culture of organization? How do we essentially achieve agility given whatever culture you might be starting with? By the way, I want to invite people to ask questions as we're going through. We will take some time at the end for some Q&A as well, but I don't want to wait till the end for everything. And if we're getting too many questions, I may have to defer some of those to the end or to a follow-up conversation just to keep us moving forward, because I want to respect everyone's Monday evening here and not keep you too late. So feel free to ask those questions. You can raise your hand and wave. Now, I can't see everyone's video because there's too many of you to see all on the screen at once. So probably if I could ask maybe if folks would maybe drop a question in the chat, and I'll ask if hopefully Sherry or Catherine can kind of monitor as we go through. And I'll pause a few times as we go through to see if there's any questions to try to address them as they're coming in.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm gonna do a screen share here. Do have a presentation with a few slides here, so let's do that. All right, I'll enlarge this to hopefully make it as big as I can make it on the screen here. There we go. Let me just pause here. Is everybody able to see my shared screen? Maybe I should ask the other question. Is anyone not able to see it? Am I showing the wrong thing? Hopefully I'm not like showing you my email inbox right now.
No, it looks good.
All right, well, here we are. Culture Eats strategy for breakfast. Maybe lunch and dinner too. All right, a little bit about myself. Got some certifications and badges there. Boring stuff. I do like to mention I'm part of a group called the Agile Leadership Journey. We're a group of guides, experienced guides that focuses on the leadership aspects of agility in various ways. And part of what I show today will be derived from some of the work that group has done. I've got all my contact info here, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. We'll move on past that. So this is about culture. I think the first important thing is to define, well, what do we mean by culture? It's kind of this nebulous thing. This is the best definition that I've found of it personally. I first saw this from a colleague named Deval Panchal, and I asked him where did he get it, and he said I don't know where I got it. And I searched, I tried to find the original source, couldn't find it, so I'll attribute it to the collective hive mind of people out there. So this is how I like to define what do we mean by culture. It's the set of behaviors that really are expected. How are people expected to behave in this organization? What are those expectations people have of each other? Now, in terms of adopting Agile practices, often cited barriers. Some of you may be familiar with versions 1 State of Agile survey that they do. I think they do it every year. These results happen to be from a few years back, but consistently year over year, what people say is the biggest barrier to Agile adoption is the organization's culture. So that one pretty much always comes out right on top. And notice the second one down there, organizational resistance to change. That's kind of another way of saying the culture. So this seems to be a big deal. People keep saying, well, our culture won't let us be Agile. So maybe we should think about what that means if we think we want to do Agile or be Agile. In terms of thinking of culture, the framework that you explored in our little breakout at the beginning is called the Competing Values Framework. Kim Cameron, Robert Quinn are two of the kind of lead folks in this area. They've written a few different books in combinations with other people. This particular one I'm showing here is the one that I kind of like best. The important thing, this all comes out of the University of Michigan, I believe. This has been a well-validated model of culture. There's been a lot of research that's gone into it over the years. So let's dive right in. What I'm showing here is a summary of the model. It's got a little bit more depth than what you looked at in our little breakout session at the beginning. So like any good model, 4 quadrants, of course, the favored model. But it's more than just 4 distinct things here, that there are important dimensions here to the vertical and horizontal axes here. So first, as you learned earlier, we have these 4 different culture archetypes: collaborate, create, compete, control. And they're arranged in this way based on those 2 axes. And on the horizontal axis here, you'll notice that the left side represents an internal focus. And on the right side of that horizontal axis, the external focus. So notice those are opposites. And the name of the framework here is the Competing Values Framework. So this is an example here of why we call it competing values. If you value an external focus over an internal focus, those 2 different value systems would be in competition with each other. In the vertical direction, at the top, you see flexibility. And at the bottom, you see stability. Again, competing values. Does the organization value flexibility or does it value stability? It's challenging to value both of those things at the same time. So that's why it's called the Competing Values Framework, in that you tend to get a tug towards one of the directions here. Notice that there's a leadership component in each quadrant that describes the leadership styles that tend to go best with each of these culture archetypes, and those values that are represented in each of the 4 that are represented here. And then on the corners, what kind of change is consistent with each of these 4 culture archetypes? So big change, fast change, incremental change, or sustainable change. All right, I want to maybe pause there real quick because when I've got my full screen going here, I can't see anything else going on. So I just wanted to see if there's any questions so far.
Not so far in the chat.
Great. All right, well, keep cranking then. I know there's a few faces here, folks that are familiar with this model too. So Kim Mantello, one for sure, that I know is absolutely familiar with it. She's probably getting bored already. Hopefully I'll have something interesting to say, getting farther in. All right, let's keep going then. Am I still sharing? I am still sharing. All right. Okay, so we've got our 4 quadrants. Let's now let's say, well, how does Agile fit into this? The world of Agile. So what I'm going to do here is show our same 4 quadrants. I'm going to overlay some various aspects of the Agile world, the broader Agile philosophy, in terms of how those things, in my humble opinion, may align with these different quadrants in the model. So let's start with collaborate. Here's some things that we see a lot in the Agile world that fall into the collaborate space: cross-team, cross-functional teams, collaboration that we see in things like DevOps. In our breakout, Mike Clement shared that they do mob programming. There's a collaborative practice for sure. Kind of aligns with the pairing or swarming idea. I'm a big fan of lean thinking in addition to Agile, and value streams are an important part of my practice, and there's a very strong collaborative part of doing value stream analysis. So there's some things in the Agile world that would align with the collaborate culture. Let's talk about the create or creative culture. Notice I've got a few things here that cross over the boundary. I think servant leadership and empowered or self-organized teams represent both collaboration and the creative culture. Innovation, adaptability. In Kanban, the idea of continuous flow, I think fits nicely in the upper half here with flexibility and a little bit more on the autonomy notion. Moving into the compete quadrant. A lot of here is customer focus, being the best. So here, having short sprints, the speed that we acquire through good DevOps practice, the craftsmanship from things like extreme programming, that emphasis on doing the best work. Those align with the compete culture. Moving into kind of across the border between compete and control here. Kanban is very metric oriented. That tends to align well with both compete and control cultures. And then going back to value streams again, the optimization part fits nicely with the idea of competition and control. And then looking at the control quadrant. Some people, I think, sometimes mistakenly think that a control culture is somehow anti-agile. I think there are elements of various agile thought that do fit nicely here. So focus on quality, really actionable metrics. The Scrum framework itself, those basic events give you really tight governance. So that, I think that fits squarely within the control mindset. Test-driven development, nice tight control mechanism. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and venture that this thing called the Scaled Agile Framework was kind of designed to appeal to control cultures. That may be a controversial statement, but I'm going to make it anyway because I don't mind making controversial statements, I guess. Let me just pause real quick. I want to maybe do a shout out. So this is just kind of my high level thoughts around some agile things that fit in the quadrants. I'd love to have anyone who's willing to share what's something that I missed here that fits in one of those 4 quadrants that you see from larger agile philosophy. Anyone see something important and want to place it in one of those 4?
one of the things that comes to my mind is digital transformation due to COVID, and quickly adapting
Yeah.
and trying to figure out where that fits.
Yeah, I would say create and compete. There's sort of, I think there's an element of both of those there, because the create quadrant is about adapting and doing new things. The compete quadrant is about, being first and being best. So I think that sits squarely on the right side, the right half of this for sure. That adaptability and competitive nature of that. Somebody just posted in the chat window, behavior-driven development. Good one. Anyone have thoughts? Where would behavior-driven development maybe fit on the diagram here?
Can you throw the diagram back up?
Oh, sure. I didn't realize I wasn't. Sorry. Yeah, let me throw that up again. Behavior-driven development. Who's got a thought? Anyone?
Collaborate?
Yeah, who was it? Was that MC?
Yes.
I can see that, definitely. I think behavior-driven development is around getting people with different backgrounds and disciplines to agree kind of on a language and a way to think about things. So I think that probably requires a collaborative effort on the part of people with, again, different disciplines and backgrounds. But I'm certainly I'm not a world-class expert in BDD. So anyone else want to offer up a thought?
Brad, can I add a controversial one maybe?
Sure.
Not really controversial. So CICD, is it control or is it compete?
Excellent.
And does it actually allow you better control than the old way of getting things out to production because you've got better testing?
Yeah, great one, Kim. I think, yeah, done right, there's certainly, I think, a strong element of control there, right? Because if we do CI/CD very well, we have tight control around how we deploy. Everything's automated. So I think, yeah, I think it can sit, again, on that boundary really between control and compete. I would say initially that there's the challenge though is it sounds crazy. Like I've worked in organizations where, oh, no, we only deploy once a month. Like there's no way we're deploying any more than that. You want to be able to deploy anytime? That's crazy. That's like the Wild West. People feel like they're losing control, but I think only when they understand that they're really not, because if you do that well, with the disciplined approach, you're not losing your control. You can still maintain quality and get the speed advantage there as well.
We have another one from James. Retro or inspect and adapt for the collaborate quadrant?
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of collaboration happening there.
So Brad, this is Erica. I don't see anything about design thinking or design sprints.
Ooh, yeah.
I think some people might think it's a bit of a stretch, but I'd put it between create and compete, somewhere in there.
Yeah, if I had to pick one for that design thinking idea, I'd probably put it in the create quadrant. It's about, to me, it's about, doing things first, coming up with the big idea. That definitely falls into that create quadrant. But yeah, I agree. There's a little overlap. Now, so I want to move forward here.
It can also generate a lot of fast change.
Yeah, you're right. Fast change too. So that's a good point. Now, of course, the world doesn't nicely always fit into 4 quadrants like we have in our model here. I like to say all models are wrong. Some are useful. I hope this one is in that useful category. So the reason I did this mapping here is we think about becoming more agile or adopting agile practices with an organization rather than fighting against the established culture of the organization. I think it's really useful to think about which practices, which principles, which behaviors and philosophies are going to align nicely with the current culture. And if we emphasize some of those, we may be able to get a better foothold, of agile practices in place, because the organization is going to say, hey, these are things that fall in line with our organization's values. We don't have a problem with those kind of things. These will help us to even strengthen some of those values. So I like to emphasize those things that go with the culture. However, sometimes that's not enough. We might need to shift the culture a little bit. So let's talk about that. So the diagram I'm sharing now is an example of what you might get as an output from an assessment, also part of the model. It's got another fancy acronym for it, the OCAI. But essentially what this assessment does is it allows you to survey folks in your organization and find out what is our current culture, or what is the shape of our current culture. That's the solid black line, that kind of, what would you call that, quadrilateral? I can remember my geometry right, four-sided figure there. And so like how strong are these four different cultures in the organization? Because again, no one organization is going to be purely and entirely in one quadrant. So here, the solid black line represents a culture that's very strongly in the control, but they have some elements of the other cultures as well. The dotted line here, again, also comes out of the assessment, and that represents what do people prefer for the organization's culture to be. So given that we know where we're at today, where would we like to be? What would we like to see more of? And an important part of the model, and the authors and creators of this model emphasize this a lot, is that there is no one good or bad culture. There are some cultures that may be more effective in certain situations for certain industries, for certain companies based on where they're at in their life cycle, for example. However, it's important to say that an organization is only as strong as its weakest quadrant in the model. So what we often find here with organizations is they're really strong in one area, but they're really weak on some other area. And that weakness might be something that we wanna address. So in this example that I've given here, it might be the create quadrant. An organization may say, yeah, we're really weak on that creative stuff, and we would be a stronger organization if we could get a little bit more of that, if we had a more balanced culture than we do today. So this is the important insight that the model can give, because we often talk about culture, but we don't have any concrete way to talk about, well, what is it? What is a culture, and what would we want to change about it anyway? So the CVF, Competing Values Framework, gives us a way to talk about it, to assess and measure where we're at and what direction we might want to move. Important here to note that we need to get leadership agreement and alignment around this. So when we talk about preferred culture, we need to get senior leaders saying, yes, we want to do that. We want to get more of these other cultures that we're weak on. We want to get a little bit more of that so we have better balance inside of our organization. And then you can make an intentional and deliberate effort to try to go there, rather than a kind of haphazard way of, let's just throw some process on the wall and see what sticks, which leads me to this important concept. So oftentimes, unfortunately, organizations say, hey, yeah, we heard about this Agile thing. Our CTO went to a conference and heard a talk, and we're going to do Agile. So leadership says, yeah, we're all on board. All right, teams, go get training and then go do Agile practice. Change your process to be an Agile process. And the problem with that's represented here is that change is quickly going to run up against these cultural values that are in place. For example, maybe it's around the idea of self-organizing teams. If you're a control culture and somebody says, yes, teams, go self-organize, how far are you going to get before the managers around those teams are like, whoa, time out, I didn't sign up for any of this cowboy self-organizing, empowered, fuzzy stuff here. We got to keep things under control. I can't let these teams be running around doing whatever they want. We'll have chaos. So you're going to run into those barriers if you just blindly say adopt a process. So we don't want to do this outside in process change. Instead, we want to do inside out to get sustainability. And I'm going to focus here on that kind of highlighted yellow ring in the circles here, because the thing about culture is very hard to directly manipulate the culture. It's Pete Behrens, I got this from Pete Behrens, it said culture is kind of like your shadow. You can't change your shadow directly. You can only move yourself in relationship to the light source to change your shadow. Culture is kind of that way too. You can't put your hands on it. But so how do you change it? Well, it's through structures, policies, metrics, and leadership behaviors that start to change those expectations people have for how we expect people to behave. That's how you sustain the change over a long time period. So this is a tricky balance because we want to do things that both align with the current culture and some things that are going to start to push us where we want to go. We want a little more compete, or we want a little bit more collaboration. We want to start doing those things that are going to nudge us in that direction, but aren't going to be so extreme that they go against our current culture values. That's what's really tough about this, is creating that balance. I'm going to share a case study here real quick. One of the organizations I worked with a while back was Ericsson, very large organization. I worked with the group that builds a mobile phone network. And this was this is a global team, a globally distributed team. And when we got started with them, as represented here, they were pretty strongly in the control quadrant. That was definitely their dominant culture. And we realized that in order for agility to succeed, we need to, again, get a little bit more balance. Now, we're not abandoning all aspects of the control culture. Notice we're just shifting it a little bit, right? We're saying, hey, we need a little bit less of that control emphasis and a little bit more of these other things for the organization to be better. So we're going to try to shift in that direction a little bit. We do that through a set of experiments. And I think it's important to call them experiments here, because when we're talking about any organization of any size with complex humans involved, we have a complex system, which means that we can't reliably predict the results of everything we do. Sometimes you're going to try something out and it won't do what you thought it would, or may have some weird, strange side effects. So we're going to run experiments that are going to try to push us into these other quadrants just a little bit. Again, we're not totally abandoning what we do, but we're going to move in that direction. The structures, policies, metrics, and leadership behaviors. So just a few examples of the things that Ericsson did. And let's start with control. So this was their dominant culture. We want to honor that and respect that and emphasize the things that are naturally going to fit in a control culture. So we had a centralized transition team managing their agile adoption. We did, very structured quarterly portfolio planning. We started this effort with a pilot project, right? We didn't say, hey, entire organization, thousands of people, everyone change at the same time. No, we're going to take incremental steps to try this out, because control cultures don't like big change, so make small change. We're going to continue emphasizing quality metrics. Oops, went the wrong way. Collaboration, we want to get a little bit more of that. We established a community of practice. We developed a group of internal Agile coaches. Those of us who are the external coaches helped to coach the coach. And the company paid close attention to employee satisfaction as we went through this effort as well. On the creative side, as a control culture, their prior way of coming up with solutions was very top-down. highest ranking person made the solution and told everyone else, here's the design, here's the solution. You just basically go type the code. Programmers were essentially glorified typists. They didn't have a lot of say over how they implemented things. They were told how to do it. We started changing that and started giving teams a lot more input into coming up with solutions. Super important one there, leaders removing impediments. This was probably the key to their success, is that the executive team was fully committed and actively involved in removing roadblocks as teams came up with them. That gave the teams the autonomy to focus on their work and get things done, knowing that the leaders had their back. On the compete side, so went from very, very long release cycles, like 12 months, a year or more, down to 3 months. So we need to get product out the door at least every 3 months. 3-week sprints are going to be our interim milestones. We're going to focus on that cycle time metric. Invested heavily in test automation to enable teams to go faster, and a shift away from measuring the number, measuring the outputs, and a shift towards measuring outcomes. So we no longer so focused on, did you deliver the planned scope? We now focus on, did you deliver the expected value, which might be a different scope than initially planned. So there's some examples around some of the things we did to, again, honor the current culture, and at the same time, start to make moves toward these other culture quadrants to balance things out. Let me see, where am I at? Yeah, I'll go ahead and do the slide, and then we'll be ready for some interactivity here, maybe some questions first. Just wanted to highlight, going back to one of the early slides we did here, there's an important leadership component here. We talked about having a more balanced culture. That implies that you need more balanced leadership also. So, you know, the very best leaders out there are going to be able to exhibit many of these behaviors, even though they may sort of have a preference or a default towards one. But as leaders build up their skills, we need them to be more flexible, more agile, if you will, about their leadership styles. And collectively, as a group of leaders, we may need to emphasize the different skills that different leaders have to try to get more of this balance. So this is another dimension that makes this tricky as well, because again, we're dealing with humans, very experienced humans with a long history and experience of maybe leading one way. And as we're talking about shifting here, well, leaders may need to adapt as well. All right, I want to pause there, and we're going to go into breakout rooms here again. I'm going to give you all some chances to explore this a little bit more, but I want to pause and maybe see if there's some questions before we go into those breakout sessions again, smaller groups.
Brad, it looks like MC Moore did add something in the chat about when you first start, and it would be more toward the left side, and then as you get better, it would move into the right side. Do you want to talk more about that, MC?
I was just bringing out the point when we were talking about CI/CD, how we were talking about it was straddling the line, and I saw it kind of shifting as teams become better with that. So I was just kind of agreeing.
Gotcha.
Yeah, great, good insight.
Brad, I'm kind of curious if you could give a couple examples of these leadership styles and how they connect or resonate with these cultures. Yeah, let me see, examples. So, see if I can pick out one. So I'll talk about the create archetype in the upper right there, the green. So in a creative culture, we value doing things first, you know, those big sort of disruptive changes. We value innovation, adaptiveness. So you can imagine the kind of leader that would thrive or would do well in that kind of organization is a leader
maybe is a visionary. We often find startups tend to lean towards this quadrant, not too surprisingly, and the leaders in startups are often the founders who came up with the big idea in the first place. So they do tend to be the entrepreneurs, the innovators, the visionaries. And for a company in that space where, you know, being first or coming up with the big idea is highly valuable, it's important to have those leaders that should have those qualities. Now, you can also imagine as that startup moves into scale-up phase, what might happen then, right? Oh, everything was great when we were a company of 12 people, but now we're 100 and it's chaos. And a lot of times that's when companies realize, you know, we need to start adding a little bit of control. Not that we want to, you know, make a dramatic phase shift there, but we may need some leaders then that are good at coordinating and monitoring and organizing things to help us get some control as the company grows larger in size. This may be an example of how companies, again, depending on their stage of growth and, you know, their place in the industry, may need different elements of leadership for different reasons. We wouldn't want to be, you know, completely creative, all about vision and no control. And you wouldn't want to be all about control with no innovation or vision for the future. Again, it gets back to that balance. The best organizations are gonna have a more balanced culture and more balanced leadership. Does that help?
That's awesome. Thank you.
Other questions before I make you all go do some work? None? Why not? No, there's got to be some. You're all being shy.
I have one, Brad.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about leadership also, and you know, the change and kind of tactically, how do you make that change? Are you saying that, you know, culture or organizationally, you're trying to shift your leadership a little bit? Do you see like the leadership team saying, okay, we have to go find ourselves a driver now? Or are they electing, okay, you become our driver? Or is it just collectively, everybody, we need to start, you know, focusing on the driver kind of attribute of leadership? How do you see kind of one way or another happening?
It's a great question. I think, you know, in my experience, I rarely see organizations go out in there and say, you know what, we need to go hire a driver. But I could imagine that happening. Like, again, the way that this can work is if I get that senior leadership team first to agree on, we do need to make this shift. We're not gonna abandon our current culture, but we need to make these you know, these little shifts in terms of our overall balance. They may look around the room and say, you know what, ladies and guys, none of us are real good at this compete thing, for example, to use your example, right? And what they may do is say, hey, maybe we want to get some leadership coaching so we can figure out what we can do to be more like that. You know, at least some of us can start to leverage some more of that kind of leadership style in order to do that. So I actually have on the wall behind me here a leadership development model called Leadership Agility. And that's what I use to work with leaders to help them broaden their skill set to be more agile and use the appropriate kind of leadership style in the appropriate situation. You know, I think in reality, very few leaders are, you know, going to be adept and expert at all of these leadership styles, and most leaders are certainly going to have their strengths and their kind of default style that they rely on. But part of that leadership development is getting beyond your default way of leading and understanding that there are other ways to lead, other tools in the toolbox of leadership that you may need to learn how to use. Right? If the only tool you have in your leadership toolkit is a hammer, might not get you so far. Good question, Ron.
Yeah, thanks.
Anything else before we get into some interactivity?
I'm actually thinking of a question, Brad. And I actually haven't fully kind of percolated on it, but as you're talking about the different leadership styles, I see a value in trying to balance and creating skills in all these quadrants. And I was also thinking about the DISC method, where they, where we suggest you have people from different parts of the DISC on your team, because that would be a more balanced team. And curious if that would be helpful. There's multiple leaders in an organization. Having leaders that maybe leaned a little bit more to one quadrant than the other to balance the whole leadership vision for the organization. I don't know if there's any overlap or not, but it seemed like something to percolate on and explore.
It is an interesting thought, Kim, and I haven't specifically considered that, to be honest, but I could imagine, again, something similar being useful for a leadership team to understand and collectively and individually, what are our strengths and weaknesses? What do we need to work on to get the right balance there? Good thought. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about that. It's a really, really thought-provoking, but I don't have an immediate answer. Sorry, I don't have all the answers. All right, let's go into breakout here. I'm gonna exit out of the presentation if I can, and hopefully I'm still sharing my screen. We're gonna go back into Mural again, and I see that somebody shared the link once again. So if you joined late, there's a link that should get you in here. Inside Mural, I've shared kind of the summary of the competing values framework there. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. Down below that, I've also shared the Ericsson case study that I mentioned. And I'm going to have you all jump into this lower left section. We've got the quadrants again, but this time in your smaller groups, what I'm going to ask you to do, once again described in the instructions at the top of this section. So if you forget, that will remind you. In your groups, talk about one or two experiments that might align with any or all of the 4 culture types. And write down a sticky note or two to capture those ideas. On the sort of this right gray box here, I've given you a reminder on, well, what kind of experiments are we talking about? So structures, policies, metrics, leadership behaviors. What are some things you can do in those areas that you could experiment with that would nudge the organization more towards any one of these 4 culture types? Again, what I want to emphasize, the point here, we're not trying to throw away the existing culture. We're just trying to gently nudge it, make it more balanced than perhaps it is. So in your groups, you can have those discussions, share some ideas on some particular things that you might experiment with, maybe things that you have tried in your organization, or things that you think perhaps would align with the 4 cultures.
Cool, thank you.
Could I share one last screenshot very briefly?
Please do, Brad, and thank you, by the way, for that talk. That was great, for that experience.
Thanks to all of you for spending your Monday evening with me. I'm sure you could be doing things that are more fun than this. Just want to mention, if you want to dig deeper into some of this stuff, some of the things that I do are Agile leadership training, got a 2-day Agile leadership class, and through the Agile leadership journey, again, this amazing group of worldwide leadership guides. We have a 6-month leadership practice program. It's actually starting very, very soon, in a couple of weeks here. So if you really want to dig deep and hone your leadership skills, you could sign up through that through agileleadershipjourney.org. I also, of course, can help you with the CVF culture assessment and coaching on what do we do about that, and individual and team leadership. I have a 360 instrument I use for leadership agility, and love to coach leaders on that stuff too. So stay in touch with me on all the usual channels that are shown there, and hope to see you all in more of these Agile Denver meetings. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you so
Thanks a
much,
lot.
Brad. And thank
Thanks,
you for
everyone.
joining us.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Very
Brad.
informative.
Time well spent.
Thank you, Brad.
Have a good night.
Welcome.